Thank you for joining me for another TechAdvice.live TV video interview. I'm here on day 2 of Tech in Gov in Canberra, and I'm joined today by Janine Mahoney. She has 35 years of background in working in the family violence space, and we are also joined by Chris Griffith, who was writing for The Australian for many years, is still writing for The Australian, and is an excellent technology journalist. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much.
So Chris, you were just moderating a session at the Tech in Gov conference called The Fight to Curb Domestic and Family Violence is Being Aided by Technology. So the title might seem self-explanatory to some, and I've got the entire session, so we're not going to necessarily rehash all of that. It's all there in another video that's in the same location this one is in. But what was the short version of the problem that technology is finally helping to solve?
Well, firstly, I guess as a reporter, I was 12 years at The Australian covering technology, but before that I was a general reporter up in Queensland, and I covered a couple of horrific domestic violence cases, one of which was the 1996 Hillcrest murders, where there was 7 people killed, if you include the perpetrator, but 6 other family members, and they left a long impression about, you know, these are some of the worst crimes that we come across, actually. And as far as being a technology journalist goes, one of the big issues here is data. Data is something that in technology we're really keen to collect and analyse, data and information. And we know that these cases, these horrific cases we read about, the Hannah Clark case up in Queensland and a very horrible case in New South Wales involving a household that was, the house was set alight, that these incidents don't come out of the blue, out of nowhere. There's been a prelude of events leading up to the horrible outcomes that have occurred. So the idea is, if you can get data and information about these events that have been crescendoing up to this, you can probably predict these horrible cases or give a good indication they could escalate to that level from the data. So the idea is getting the data really early and then being able to prevent victims of this. And of course those victims are their partners, the mothers mostly, but not necessarily, and in particular the children. We sometimes, I don't know why, but we see it, we don't see how much children suffer from domestic and family violence, and we need to do that.
Yeah, and yet we have that famous sort of sigh, won't anybody think of the children? But it sounds like nobody is. I mean, it's just one of those things. But Janine, you know, what can you tell us about the short version of your background and your work and focus in this area?
I originally started with government, but interestingly enough, in the very first team to look at family violence as a government responsibility, then moved on to working in the community sector, running family violence services, and founded one of the largest services in Victoria that worked with the high to extreme risk clients and their children, and then went on to consult in that space, and more recently recognising that there was a huge gap that could be filled by technology, looking to how I could use that knowledge from across all of those experiences to guide technologists on the difference that they actually could make. And I think that, you know, we forget that when we look for solutions, that the person that has the best knowledge and the best understanding of what's needed is the person who needs the outcomes. And I think that it's only very recently that there's been a focus on co-design and talking to those people that will be the users, so the frontline workers, the survivors and victims, and gathering their thoughts on what do they need. I mean, historically, government has really looked in silos at how they approach, and I'm not even talking about the technology at this point, but we have police doing their job, we have family violence services doing theirs, the courts, hospitals, you know, the touch points are so many for family violence survivors. You know, there was a study done in the US that showed on average a survivor has to go to 11 different agencies, and they just go from place to place repeating this story. The story is often recorded by someone else, often in haste because they are so busy, Demand is incredibly high for family violence responses. Call to police every 2 minutes in Australia, every 30 seconds in the UK and the US. Demand is incredible. So there's so many versions of this information that is captured across multiple agencies. The person is re-traumatised every time they tell that story. And we have what's not really looked at that often, massive data duplication. But it's all quite different, and it's all recorded in siloed, disparate services. We then look at the fact that because people are so busy at these services, there's lots of gaps as well. So, so many people have incidents occurring like with financial abuse, coercive control, property damage. There is just no time for them to have every incident recorded, and therefore significant gaps in the insights that are required to get that big picture of what is the risk, what's the threat. If you look at other parts of the community where there are people posing a risk, and we look at criminal gangs, bikie gangs, terrorists, government has got very well orchestrated technology abilities on gathering insights, analysing it, looking at that threat intelligence. We do not have that for family violence. Threat intelligence around family violence perpetrators is significantly lacking. It's not able to be analysed and shared, and thus we have an exploding problem in our community.
So Janine, what can you tell us about the point of view of the survivor? And why is this getting worse every month?
Okay, so from the survivor's perspective, and I have spoken to literally tens of thousands of survivors, all they want is to be safe. They just want that fear removed and that constant having to be on alert, constantly concerned about not just their safety, their children's safety, their broader family members, their co-workers. The ripple effect out of the risk is huge. They want to be safe. Now, the only way they can be safe is if we work out who's making them not safe, and we put our spotlight onto those people. We're not doing that terribly well. The media is very focused on the crisis point, the survivors, what's happened to them. Very little ethical reporting is done on the person who is actually posing the risk. The spotlight is not there either from the media nor from the government perspective in the way that I believe it should be, in the way that survivors have constantly talked to me. Where we've got a lot of lobbying occurring to have more money put into refuge accommodation. I have never met a survivor that's choice is to go and live in a refuge. Most survivors actually are not homeless, as is reported. They have a home. It is just not safe for them to be there. We need to be looking at the fact that we need to keep these survivors in their homes, connected to their communities, connected to their employment, their kids to school. They go to a refuge and their life is totally disrupted. They are disconnected from everything. We would have children come in. They come in without their toys, their pets. They can't talk to grandma or grandpa. They can't go to school. They have no ability to chat to their friends. They're almost like prisoners in a service that's protecting them, and it's very valid because their lives are seriously at risk. But the disruption and the trauma that causes that child is enormous, and it stays with them for life.
Now, one of the most ethical journalists I know is Chris Griffith. He's here with us, and he's been shining a spotlight by moderating this panel today. So, Chris, what are the other issues you're seeing in trying to accelerate the adoption of these technologies, which most people would be unaware of, which is one of the reasons why you are so stridently letting the world know?
Well, as I said, data is really key to this. Janine mentioned a moment ago the issue of siloed information. It seems to be a problem across government areas. There was of course, that horrible case in North Queensland where 2 police officers were shot and killed, and it was from there that we learnt how siloed our gun registers were state by state around the country, and of course work's been going to try and overcome that problem. And I think siloing is a big issue in here, as Janine's talked about, that we've got all the possibilities of finding out information about potential victims and what's happening, but it's in different parts of government. And I think that as far as being a technology person's concerned, I'd hope to see some efforts into breaking that down to homogenisation of how the data's there, so it can be analysed more fully, and we get a better, more accurate picture of where these serious cases lie. And also so that the right agencies therefore get to look at that information and also assess what help that they can give.
And to both of you, I mean, obviously AI is the huge flavour of the world. I mean, I was just thinking before that, you mentioned siloed information, and, back in like 10 years ago, they were talking about digital transformation. And I read somewhere that people, it's no longer the flavour of, it's now AI, but there's still so many companies yet to do proper digital transformation. And I mention this because that was supposed to break down all these silos. And if all these silos still exist, clearly that hasn't happened. So, I mean, what impact is AI going to have in protecting children, rolling these technologies out, helping to somehow, I mean, I don't want it to be like pre-crime with Minority Report where the AI is, looking and accusing people before things happen. But what can you guys both say in that regard?
Well, I think that it would be interesting to use AI to have a look at the literally hundreds of reports that have been done on what's required to change the way that family violence is addressed.
Yeah.
And, having read them all, the one thing I know is that information sharing comes up as a recommendation in every single report. The first one that I noted it on was the inquest into Luke Batty when he was a young child from Victoria who was murdered by his father. And since then, just about every report has said that. So that's the starting point for AI on the changes that it can deliver. It can actually bring together and consolidate into a shorter report what's needed. First point. But I think that for me, AI has got much more ability to create the efficiencies that are required. You look at the Productivity Commission report on what's needed in government across the board, and it's all around creating efficiencies and productivities. We have got incredibly talented, experienced, knowledgeable people spending half or more of their time with an admin burden that is just absolutely no longer necessary. With the capacities that we've got with analytics and AI, their jobs can be streamlined, and so their skills and expertise can be used for what is best needed.
Yeah, they're not paper shuffling.
Paper shuffling, like the amount of time. Like, it's like for every family violence report, it can be 3 to 4 hours of a person's time writing it all down. And then you've got multiple people writing down exactly the same thing, and it's just like, why? When now we have these amazing technologies that can take away that.
Transcribe it, summarise it. I've got an AI voice recorder that does all of that. I love it. Chris?
Yeah, I think AI as a kind of triager here and being able to look at information and make a decision on what its value is in that instance. I think also when it comes to computer systems in government, there's still really old ones around. Like even 60s, 70s mainframes systems.
I mean, some of the banks are still supposed to be using core systems that are old deep down somewhere, so it's not unusual for old stuff to... COBOL programmers are still needed, right? Not just for
That's
Y2K.
Right. I could still be a COBOL programmer if I wanted to, but we have to have modern computer systems. We have to get rid of the walls between these departments. And one of the beauties of AI is that if you're going to apply it in an area like this, you can go back and test it against past cases
to see how well it does,
and vary your model to tweak your model so that it gives you a good indicator. Now, AI in most cases like this would be throwing up where there's potential for this to be like a really serious situation, and that could apply here too. So AI can help you identify some priorities. It's not the definitive judge, but it certainly can steer you in the right direction.
So Janine, what else do we need to know about your work, and what is your final message to the viewers and readers?
I think the final message is that we need to unite on this problem. Looking at it from a community perspective and saying, like, this is something that affects all of us in some way. We can no longer have each government department looking at it from their perspective and a systems approach individually. It's got to be elevated up to look at, well, how do we look across the systems and create an integration that will deliver better outcomes? So I've always worked with the belief that you centre solutions around people. Technology can enable, what's required, and it's focused on outcomes. So if we look at that and we say, right, that is our goal. The other thing I'm very passionate about is children, keeping them safe and giving them every opportunity to have a happy, safe life and reach their potential. If we can put children at the centre and say, right, every decision we make as a community and government needs to say, will this make life better for children in general or not, and use that as the benchmark. And I think, especially in relation to technology, like a lot's happening with technology where there's a spotlight on the risks to children, then that tech shouldn't happen, in my opinion. I know it's very, very basic, but let's look after our next generation.
Yeah.
It's not good enough that we have millions of children every day scared, in fear. I know we ran a school, and at 3 o'clock when kids know that half an hour later the bell's going to ring, most kids are like, yes, getting home, can go play.
And
Kids with family violence turn into hyper-vigilant little people, and they start having anxiety and they start
PTSD,
because they have no idea what is going on when they get home, and they don't know whether something dreadful is about to happen. So we should be doing stuff about that. That's what we need to focus on.
And without children, there is no future for the human race. And if they're damaged, how can we expect them to be positive leaders for tomorrow? They'll be tyrants and dictators. Who knows? I mean, you don't want that.
There's been some really interesting research done around prison populations and in a number of countries. And there is an incredibly high number of people in prisons. The common thread is not just crime, it's that they experience family violence or child abuse as children. And that trauma impact that leads to the PTSD that flows through depression, anxiety, substance addictions, anger, gambling. People don't even know that that's why they're behaving that way, why they're feeling that way. We don't talk about it. If we can look at that and say, right, we don't want children to ever have that happen, all of a sudden we're creating a future where a lot of these other societal problems are going to start to reduce. The ripple effect of family violence and child abuse is just enormous, and if we can look at how do we solve that, we're looking at a much safer generation to come.
And Chris, your final message?
I think in the end of the day, early intervention in these cases is the biggest single thing that we can do. But of course there are aspects to this too, what happens to the people who are the victims, what support they're given, what support the kids are given for schooling and that, and to the partner who is the victim, they probably want to live still in their own home, and that there's a lot to sort out in the aftermath. But the very first thing is to prevent these incidents escalating that way that they have very dramatically.
Well, there's an extended version of this discussion with a couple of more excellent participants that will be in the same article this video is embedded into. So Janine Mahoney and Chris Griffith, thank you very much for your time, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.